Good afternoon, webinar. My name is Kay Reed. I'm the executive director of this organization, and I'm pleased to have you here. Today, we're going to be having a presentation by as I call them, the squad from Mathematica, who did a great study on how to make relationship skills programming more inclusive of LGBTQ plus youth. The name of the project was Framing Research Project. So before we get further, just a little bit of housekeeping. You have a control panel, or you have a panel on one side of your screen there, and there's a way for you to raise your hand. So can you raise your hand if this is the first DIBEL webinar you've ever attended? We've had them for like over 10 years, but if this is your first one, I want to say hey to you. So please raise your hand if it's your first webinar. Let's see. Okay, well, welcome to all of you who are returning, and welcome especially to the new people. We do these every month on the second Wednesday at 1 Pacific. So super happy to have you here. You can take down your hands now. I guess yeah. So two things, or three, I guess. If you can't hear us, it's probably on your end, not our end. So if that happens, please call in using the phone number on your invitation, or log out, log back in. And in any case, we will have archived this video on our website, and so you can come back to it or refer others to it. While there are no today in the presentation, we will be sending you links to the reports that the framing team is talking about. So this will be archived. You will get the reports, etc. There is a questions area, and that means if you have a question, please ask your question there. We will try to get to all of them during this presentation, but if we can't, we will respond afterwards. So I think that's it for housekeeping. So let's go to the next, talk a little bit about the DIBEL Institute. We'll make this super fast since most of you know us. These are Charlie and Helen DIBEL. They started the DIBEL Institute, just normal folks who had a big vision for helping young people lead more successful lives by helping them focus on their intimate relationships, gain confidence in their intimate relationships, and learn how to navigate their love lives. Okay, next slide. Oh, by the way, thank you to the slide person. That's Kim, and she's our able engineer in the background. So for those of you who don't know, the DIBEL Institute is a national independent nonprofit. There's nobody behind the screen. It's just us folks. And we don't do direct services. We work through people like you. So when I say we reached 1,000 clients or students last year, that means you reached them. Thank you so much. We couldn't do our work unless you were doing your work. So we're really thrilled to have you all on board. And we love helping our clients find funding to do this kind of work. So that's one of the joys of our life, is to expand access to relationship education around the country. Next slide, please. So our mission really focused. We have a niche position. We're helping teens and young adults with knowledge and skills to successfully navigate their intimate relationships, or get smart about their love lives. We talk to kids a lot about sex. We talked to kids a lot about how to be a good employee. We hardly ever talk to them about how to be a good partner, how to be a good friend. And that's kind of the space we live in. It's not just kind of, that's the space we live in. So proud to do that. And we operate with a set of values. The first value is that we're big fans of research. Kim, if you have the next slide, thank you. So we're super big fans of research. Science got what we do. We know that science changes over time. It's not that, we just learn more over time. It's not that science is willy-nilly. We just, like last week they said high intensity short exercise is the best, and this week they say, well, really maybe walking is fine. That means that neither of them is necessarily false. They just get more information, and so that's what we do here, is we take research, facts, knowledge from science and apply them. So when you teach a DIBEL program, you can be assured that you're getting the most recent data and information and it might change a little bit over time. So stay tuned. But basically, a lot of this is pretty straightforward. But what's interesting, like today, is we're going to talk about how to make this more inclusive of diverse populations, and so that informs what we do. So we're really thrilled to have this presentation. Okay, next slide, please. We're big fans of safe, stable, and nurturing families. We're less concerned, and this is what the research is showing, there's less concern about what legal form you're in. I mean, there are some advantages, and there's, you know, that you can go. I did a webinar about 18 months ago. You can take a look at what we know now. But really what we want to help young people understand is that if you're raising children, then whatever form you're raising them in, a single parent, step family, biological family, a long-term cohabiting relationship, is that safe, stable, and nurturing is the best place to raise children. And there's a lot of things you can do to make, in terms of your love life choices, to make that easier to happen. And that's what we really want to help people do. All right, last slide. Relationship education is for everyone. It's for all of us, regardless of your age, regardless of your race or ethnicity or marital status or who you love. We make our programs available to a wide number of people. They're available in Spanish now. They're available from grades 5 to, you know, mid-20s, late 20s, and for diverse populations, straight people, LGBTQ plus people, because we think that this, you know, relationships are essential to what makes us human. Those connections add to the years of our lives, not only the quality, but the quantity of those lives. So we want to make this kind of knowledge widely available. And so if you have a question about what would help a young person, the answer to me is always, you know, relationship education would help them. But that's, you know, where you sit is where you stand. All righty. So without further ado, today we have this amazing team from Mathematica who put together a report on by doing a literature search, by doing quantitative research, qualitative research, and then writing a report that will help all of us in this field of youth relationship education to do a better job relating to, recruiting, supervising, you know, everything around relationship skills programming for youth. I think especially grants are going to be recompeted in a year, about maybe a little less. It's important that we have in our toolkit ways to reach diverse populations, and when we reach them, ways to actually serve them in a meaningful way. So Julia, Lourdes, and Lexi, if you want to pop on. There. I'm going to appreciate you, welcome you, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Take it away.
All right. Can you hear me? All right. Well, thank you so much, Kay, for that introduction. I am thrilled to be here today to present on a study we conducted as part of the Framing Research Project to understand how to make relationship education programs more inclusive for LGBTQ+ youth. My name is Julia Alamillo. I am a senior researcher at Mathematica, and I directed the Framing Research Project and also led the study. And I am joined by two of my co-researchers on this work, Lourdes Fernandez, who led the qualitative data collection, and Lexi Uyet, who led the literature review. And we all worked very closely together on all phases of the project and put together the report and some briefs, which you will be able to access after this presentation. So next slide. So as I mentioned, this study was conducted as part of the Framing Research Project, which stands for Fatherhood, Relationships, and Marriage, Illuminating the Next Generation of Research. Framing was funded by the Administration for Children and Families, or ACF, at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from 2018 through 2023. The Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation managed the project, and staff at two firms, Mathematica and Public Strategies, partnered to conduct the work. And the overall goal of Framing was to provide ACF with information to support the development of its learning agenda for healthy marriage and relationship education programs, or HMRE programs for short, as well as responsible fatherhood programs, or RF programs for short. So basically our charge was to help ACF take stock of the existing research on these programs and figure out ways to support and improve these programs in the future. Next slide. So what's on the agenda for today? We're going to start by providing some background on federally funded relationship education programs, as well as the demographics of LGBTQ+ youth. LGBTQ+ is an acronym that we'll be using a lot throughout the presentation today. It stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. And the plus sign represents the many other groups that are included under the LGBTQ+ umbrella, such as intersex, asexual, or two-spirit individuals. After this background info, we'll share the research questions that guided our study, as well as the data that we collected. And then the bulk of our time will be spent discussing what we learned about challenges and strategies for enhancing LGBTQ+ inclusivity in HMRE programs for youth. Finally, we'll end with a discussion of what we still don't know about LGBTQ inclusivity in these programs and considerations for future research and future programming. All right, if you have any questions throughout today's presentation, you can feel free to drop them in the chat or the control panel. If it's a clarifying question, well, Kay Reed is going to be monitoring the questions. If it's a clarification question, she's going to interrupt and we'll answer that right away. Or if it's kind of a bigger picture question, we will hold it for the end and answer it then. But feel free to drop questions in there as they enter your mind. Next slide. All right, so first let me start with some background about healthy marriage and relationship education programs and LGBTQ+ youth. Next slide. So given that we're at a webinar sponsored by Dibble, I'm assuming many of you are very familiar with these programs. Many of you are probably even involved in the development and delivery of these programs. However, you may be less aware of the history of federal funding for healthy marriage and relationship education programs. So since the mid-2000s, the federal government has authorized funding to support healthy marriage initiatives, including HMRE programs for youth. These programs are funded by the Office of Family Assistance within the Administration for Children and Families. The programs offer a broad range of relationship education services for people of different ages. Some programs are designed for adult couples and address topics such as how to build intimacy and trust with a partner. Other programs, like the ones we'll be talking about today, are designed for teens and young adults who may not have much experience with romantic relationships. In 2020, OFA allocated separate funding to youth and adult HMRE programs for the first time. And with this 2020 funding stream, OFA awarded more than $24 million to programs serving high school age youth and young adults between the ages of 18 and 24. Next slide. So what do HMRE programs for youth cover? These programs aim to help teens and young adults improve their relationship skills, attitudes, and behaviors in order to form healthy relationships in adolescence and adulthood. Many of these programs feature a structured curriculum, such as those distributed by Dibble. For instance, Relationship Smarts Plus and Love Notes are two of the more commonly used curricula among these programs. The programs tend to have some common themes. For instance, most address topics such as identifying personal values, understanding the characteristics of healthy and unhealthy relationships, improving communication and conflict management skills, dating violence prevention, and others. Some, but not all curricula also cover topics such as reducing risky sexual behavior and teen pregnancy and preparing teens for college and a career. Next slide. Most HMRE programs for youth are delivered in high schools in a class during the regular school day, such as health or consumer and family sciences. These programs are typically delivered by facilitators who work for an outside organization and come into the classroom to deliver the program, or by classroom teachers themselves who have been trained to deliver the program. And even though HMRE programs are most commonly delivered in high schools, they are also sometimes delivered in other settings, such as after school, or in places of worship, community centers, libraries, etc. Most of the commonly used HMRE curricula seem to be between 10 and 15 lessons, and with each lesson lasting between 60 and 90 minutes. So that's a fairly consistent amount of content, but the length of programs, the overall length, can vary quite a bit. For example, some programs may decide to offer lessons once a week over the course of a semester, whereas other programs may offer lessons every day over the course of 2 weeks. Next slide. All right, and before turning to our study, I want to provide a little bit of context on LGBTQ+ youth in the United States. Recent data from the CDC suggests that over a quarter of high schoolers in the US today identify as LGBTQ+. This is up from more like 11% in 2015, so a pretty rapid increase over the last 9 years. Research indicates that LGBTQ+ youth face different relationship issues than their cisgender heterosexual peers. I don't want to go into these issues too much right now, since we'll cover them quite a bit more throughout the presentation, but things like coming out to family and friends and lack of support from family members and friends are common issues among LGBTQ+ youth. Research also indicates that LGBTQ+ youth are more at risk of adverse mental health outcomes, including suicide, than their cisgender heterosexual peers. For all of these reasons, there is a need for HMRE programs to have guidance on how to make their services more inclusive for LGBTQ+ youth in their communities. And so that's what we're going to cover today. With that, I will turn it over to Lexi to get into the details of our study. Next slide.
Thanks, Julia. I'll provide a brief overview of our research questions and data collection sources before introducing our key findings. One note, because the scope of our study included programs for youth and adults, our research questions and methods comprise both, though here we'll highlight specifically what was done related to programs that serve young people. Next slide, please. Our study was interested in 3 primary research questions. First, what challenges do HMRE programs face related to serving LGBTQ+ youth? Second, what promising practices or approaches exist for making these programs more inclusive for LGBTQ+ youth? And third, what gaps remain in our understanding of how to make HMRE programs more inclusive for LGBTQ+ youth? Next slide, please. To explore those research questions, we used a 6-step data collection approach. Next slide. So we began with a literature review. We worked with our librarian at Mathematica to conduct a search on relationship education and related programming, such as mental health or sexual health education that served LGBTQ+ youth. We identified 1,938 studies, which were then screened by our trained study team. And ultimately, we reviewed and included 84 articles on programs for youth. Next, our team also reviewed literature and resources related to LGBTQ+ inclusivity across different practice areas, including psychology, sociology, nursing, and allied health. The review included both peer-reviewed articles and gray literature, such as practitioner or participant-focused toolkits, guides, and reports. And we ultimately reviewed 33 resources that provided guidance and recommendations for increasing the inclusivity of program services, organizational climate, and staffing. We conducted a focus group with HMRE program directors and practitioners who serve LGBTQ+ youth to discuss their experiences in making programming more inclusive for these young people. This discussion focused on inclusivity challenges and strategies in areas such as program implementation and community partnerships, as well as the social and political context in which programs operate. Finally, we conducted individual interviews with 4 HMRE program educators that worked with youth and 6 with past or current HMRE youth program participants. In these one-on-one interviews, topics included experiences delivering or participating in programming, challenges or issues encountered, and the ideas and strategies for how programming could be more inclusive for LGBTQ+ youth in the future. Next slide, please. So we identified key findings in 3 areas: recruitment, outreach, and initial engagement, program content and delivery, and staff hiring and training. We'll present respective challenges and strategies by each key finding. Next slide, please. I want to start by elevating one finding related to recruitment, outreach, and initial engagement, which was how important it was to consider program setting and context at this stage. Programs operating outside of schools in community-based settings often engage in a variety of outreach activities to meet potential participants. This may include hanging flyers in known public locations like libraries or community centers or cafes, advertising on social media, or attending community events to meet interested youth. On the other hand, programs operating in schools are often delivered as part of the regular school day, as Julia mentioned. And in this case, programs may not engage in those same types of recruitment activities with young people directly. And because considerations around recruitment and engagement can be different based on that setting, so are the associated challenges and strategies. Next slide, please. For challenges related to recruitment, outreach, and initial engagement, two key findings emerged. The first was that programs may not know where to reach LGBTQ+ youth. Programs conducting that community-based recruitment may not know where to advertise to these communities. For example, one program educator we interviewed noted that they really want to work with more LGBTQ+ youth during their summer program, but the program often struggles to know where or how to reach the community or if those efforts are paying off. The second challenge was that outreach and initial program materials might lack affirming imagery and language. Recruitment or introductory materials often feature heterosexual cisgender couples and do not mention LGBTQ+ young people or their relationships. These materials may also use language that could feel exclusionary to youth, like only using specific gendered pronouns such as he and she, or describing romantic interests as a boyfriend or girlfriend rather than also including additional terms like partner. LGBTQ+ youth notice what is or is not included in these materials. As one youth participant recalled, the program appeared very heteronormative. It didn't mention trans people, didn't mention aromantic people, didn't mention polyamorous people, didn't mention asexual people. There's so many people in the LGBTQ+ and same gender loving community who the program never really mentioned or really promoted. This perceived lack of relevance for LGBTQ+ youth was shown to undermine youth interest in participating in programming in both the literature and in our interviews. Next slide, please. So what strategies can be used to overcome these challenges? For recruitment, programs can recruit in settings that are welcoming to and frequented by LGBTQ+ young people. This could include local pride centers or community centers, LGBTQ+ owned businesses, organizations that host events for the community, or digital spaces like websites or newsletters for local LGBTQ+ news and events. Programs could also consider using tailored social media advertising to show ads for the program to young people who like or engage with specific topics, such as a local LGBTQ+ advocacy group or event page. When conducting outreach, programs can also make sure people's first impression of the program is one of inclusivity. This might include adding imagery that will signal inclusion to recruitment materials, such as a pride flag or rainbow, expanding language use to add more inclusive terms like partner and relationship education, and encouraging all participants to share names and pronouns if they're comfortable from their first engagement. And finally, programs can partner with and employ members of the LGBTQ+ community to strengthen recruitment, outreach, and engagement. And I think this strategy is also relevant for the aforementioned ones as well. A local perspective from a community member may help to overcome specific recruitment and outreach challenges a program faces, like knowing exactly which businesses in your area are LGBTQ+ friendly. These partnerships and staff members can also help overcome challenges related to recruitment content. As one program educator noted, we go to the LGBT center, we network with them there, and then in the program materials where it says he or she, we try to change it up and say whichever your partner's label, however you and your partner label yourselves. And in this example, this program is working with their trusted community partner to network and identify potential participants and to update the language used in materials to signal inclusion. Engaging trusted community partners can go a long way towards enacting some of these strategies and building an authentic connection with LGBTQ+ youth in their community. And I will turn it over to my colleague Lourdes to talk more about program content and staff hiring and training.
Thank you, Lexi. Hi, everyone. I will begin by talking about some of the challenges related to program content and delivery. Some of these challenges you'll notice overlap with challenges faced in recruitment and initial engagement that Lexi mentioned. For example, educators, program directors, and youth pointed out that program materials often lack images of LGBTQ+ youth, and that materials often include heteronormative examples of relationships that may or may not reflect LGBTQ+ youth experiences. This includes anything from images, pictures, handouts, videos, and examples. As one youth said, I was feeling a little bit left out in a way, but expecting it. Additionally, programs rarely address experiences or issues that are specific for LGBTQ+ youth relationships. While many of the educators and youth pointed out that many of the topics are relevant to their experiences, for example, healthy communication is important for many people in many types of relationships, there is a lack of centering youth experiences in the context of LGBTQ+ relationships. For example, healthy communication that centers around coming out to a parent or experiencing stigma or rejection. Also, the use of heteronormative gender roles and use of gender language like boyfriend, girlfriend. Slide. Additional challenges related to program content and delivery that educators and youth shared is that when programs address LGBTQ+ relationships, they tend to focus on same-sex couples. There are trans, bisexual, and non-binary youth tend to experience stigma within and outside LGBTQ+ communities, and it is important to address the specific issues they face in their relationships. This is not generally covered in relationship education programs. Additionally, programs tend to use a deficit-based approach when discussing LGBTQ+ people and their relationships. One educator shared that the only mention of LGBTQ+ relationships in the curriculum they use is in the context of higher risk for teen dating violence. While it is important to share with youth all aspects, positive and negative aspects of relationships, it is also important if we're sharing statistics to share along with the statistics the factors that contribute to negative relationship outcomes. Presenting relationships as on a deficit model can increase stigmatizing effects for youth. Programs address LGBTQ+ relationships, and as they do that, experience external constraints when modifying content. In this one, the constraints vary. For example, schools might have constraints on how school boards and parents are involved in shaping what is discussed in the classroom. And this depends and varies widely from region to region in the country. Changes to the curriculum can be difficult to make, and often permission is needed to make those changes. And then there's a local, state, and political landscape that can shape what can be discussed or not discussed in the classroom, in school settings. As one youth program educator says, the rhetoric, it's just becoming more inflamed. So in that sense, people are paying more attention to these things in a negative way, like looking for something to almost make an issue of. This all constrains how facilitators and program directors make decisions about what is covered. Next. Some of the strategies that we heard from educators and program directors include updating program language, images, and examples to be inclusive of LGBTQ people and their relationships. And for example, working with curriculum developers to change materials and update materials, including inclusive language, images, worksheets, handouts, PowerPoint slides, videos. Also working with partners in the community who are supportive of the LGBTQ+ community to develop materials, and including examples and images of gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, non-binary youth in same or different gender relationships. Using pronouns was also mentioned by both youth and educators. Additionally, addressing topics and issues that are relevant to LGBTQ+ people and relationships can make content more inclusive. You can see the list on the slide. I will mention some of those topics and summarize them. For example, again, working with curriculum developers to include the impact of gender norms and language on LGBTQ plus youth, defining types of romantic relationships and normalizing their existence, including conversations about how to come out to parents, peers, and others, and talking to family and peers about sexuality and gender identity, including examples and material about consent, coercion, and healthy communication in the context of LGBTQ plus relationships, and including content in the context of marriage, pregnancy, and parenting in LGBTQ plus relationships, and not limiting those examples to same-sex examples, same-sex couple examples. Slide. Additionally, other strategies that were recommended and that appear in the literature include presenting information about LGBTQ plus people's experiences using a strengths-based approach. For example, working again with community partners and experts to integrate inclusive material with a strengths-based approach that focuses on resilience and other positive aspects of LGBTQ plus relationships, while acknowledging the role of stigma, discrimination, minority stress in negative relationship outcomes. Finally, considering alternative delivery formats for LGBTQ plus inclusive programming. And we heard some suggestions from both educators and youth, which appear in the literature also. For example, using online platforms, text messaging, and other virtual forums, and working with GSAs within schools, or partnering with organizations outside of school settings, such as health clinics, youth shelters, LGBTQ plus community centers, to create content and deliver programming. Next. Next, I will speak, I'll describe the challenges related to staff hiring and training that surfaced during the study. First, a lack of LGBTQ plus staff can make it difficult for LGBTQ plus youth to connect and engage with the program. And additionally, educators often need more training on best practices for serving youth. This came up quite a bit. Educators felt the need for ongoing training. They expressed a desire for additional training. Some of them mentioned that they try to learn on their own and find resources on their own. Studies show that youth become less engaged and are more likely to drop out if they don't feel like they're being engaged. And additionally, there's always a risk of providing harmful advice, however unintentionally, if there's not appropriate training and support. Educators often need more understanding of the school context and social dynamic. Some educators express fear of getting in trouble, not being sure what to say and when to say it. This, again, the landscape shifts quickly and it varies widely between regions and states. So it is important, this was a challenge of understanding what to say, when to say it, what are the restrictions, not only at the state level, but also in the local school context. As one program director said, I feel it's harder to create the connection with LGBTQ plus youth because I was raised in a time when this wasn't a common thing. One of the areas I struggle with is just knowing what to say. I don't know what I don't know. Slide. Thank you. Some of the strategies that program directors and educators shared and that also appear in the literature include hiring staff who are LGBTQ plus or who have lived experience as an ally or advocate, and hiring staff who are open-minded and accepting of LGBTQ plus people and their relationships. Of course, hiring can be challenging. Aligning staff demographics to all of the possible demographic characteristics of participating youth can be very difficult. So some of the recommendations we heard was to use interviews to include scenarios and assess attitudes towards LGBTQ plus people and their relationships. And if that is not feasible, to use cover letters that include space for sharing advocacy experience. Additionally, programs should develop policies that require respect and inclusivity. And we also heard that regular supervisory conversations and conversations among staff are important, and that performance evaluations can also be used to ensure that this is centered, that open-mindedness and accepting of LGBTQ plus people becomes embedded in all programmatic activities. Finally, training. Educators offered a lot of suggestions on the types of training they would like to have access to. You can see the list there. These include understanding of common terminology and using terms accurately, covering the history that includes strengths and positive aspects of LGBTQ+ relationships, covering the role of stigma, discrimination, and rejection on youth mental health and relationship outcomes, understanding the diversity of the LGBTQ+ population, that it is not a monolith, the tensions within the community, how bisexual, trans, non-binary youth may experience additional stigma, and understanding that relationships vary widely. Additionally, cultural humility training was suggested a few times. This is a way of thinking with empathy and active listening, and importantly, it prepares educators to react in non-defensive ways when they are in an uncomfortable situation in the classroom, when they're trying to learn and incorporate the learning they're getting from youth who are pushing a little bit on what they understand. Additionally, I'm sorry, I lost the slide. Okay. Additionally, self-reflection and understanding biases and misconceptions about the LGBTQ+ community, and engaging in training that allows for that self-reflection to happen, and techniques for managing sensitive situations in the classroom. For example, if a student says something disrespectful or offensive towards another student, how to manage that in an empathetic way that allows for the space to grow and learn. Importantly, some of the educators also mentioned the importance of understanding the laws of the state laws and local policies regarding what can and cannot be discussed in a classroom, and access to resources, not only for educators to find those resources and learn more, but also resources they can share with youth. That includes national organizations like the Trevor Project, GLAAD, the Human Rights Campaign, but as importantly, local community organizations that can provide local support and understand the local landscape. Next. In this next section, I'm gonna briefly describe remaining gaps and considerations for future research and programming. Slide. During this study, we found that programs often lack data on participants' sexual orientation and gender identity. This is commonly, the common term is SOGI. And so SOGI questions are useful for informing adaptations to the program, for understanding program outcomes, and for example, understanding who's enrolling, who's not enrolling, who's more likely to drop out. I want to add, regarding SOGI questions, there are good resources out there on how to write inclusive SOGI questions that allow for youth to express their identities more freely, and there are great resources out there, and also the importance of maintaining privacy when collecting SOGI data. Additionally, little is known about the relationship experiences of bisexual, trans, and non-binary youth. This was educators mentioned it, program directors mentioned it, and the literature says the same thing. So more research is needed to understand those experiences. And school-based settings can create additional constraints for program outreach, content, and delivery. It is important for programs to have additional resources to manage these constraints. One of the suggestions is to partner and create relationships with other programs in other states to figure out some of this, how to overcome some of these constraints. Similarly, with state policies and the political environment, which can create additional constraints on programs, it is important to understand how community partnerships, relationship building can support programs that operate in a variety of political environments. There's not enough research on this and not enough resources. Next. Overall, the youth said that they found most of the material very relevant to their experiences. And educators said that they wanted more training, but also were already enacting strategies to make the programs more inclusive. One of the big takeaways that came out of this is that inclusion means more than being welcoming, that youth need to have their needs directly addressed, and that means that while a lot of the topics are very relevant to a lot of people in a lot of relationships, that it is important to tailor some of the content to center the experiences of LGBTQ+ youth. Once again, for example, healthy communication in the context of a relationship is a great topic that can be deepened and centered around LGBTQ+ experiences by including what a youth who might experience rejection and stigma from coming out might feel and how to manage that communication. I will close with this quote from a program evaluator and practitioner. It ultimately comes down to doing no harm. And if we're not offering programs in inclusive ways, we're doing harm, whether we mean to or not. It's not just leaving people out, it's causing some emotional and mental discomfort and potentially distress. And I think we have to avoid that at all costs. Next slide. For more information, these are some links to resources. They will be emailed to you after the webinar. These include the OPRE Framing Research Project website, the white paper, and the 2 associated briefs. Thank you very much. I'll pass it on to Kay to manage the questions.
Yes, unless Julia, there's something you'd like to add to all of this?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So there's one question, and we'll get to this, what's, on and on here. But Lanessa asks, how would one present to a potential job opportunity when applying what they identify as? Would it be okay to mention it in a resume? If so, how? And then she goes on to say, this question was actually asked by a student of ours, excuse me, since they have not legally changed their name, they go by a different name. So this isn't exactly a relationship skills question, but I guess, let's say you wanted to be considered by a relationship skills program and that you wanted them to know that you had diverse experience, or you identified as non-cisgender. How or should you, or what do you think? Put it on a resume.
Lourdes, I'm going to let you take the first stab since you covered that content in your section.
Yes, I'll take a stab at it. So it's not related to relationship education, but one thing programs can do, and I think we have better data from the program perspective, they allow for the forms to have a gender identity question and allow it to be optional, so that applicants can, and this is mostly for youth participating, but it can be applied in the application process, so that there's that option to mark your gender without actually making it forced. It doesn't have to be, it is an option. I would say the other thing based on the findings would be that the advertising for the job application can more explicitly say and invite a wider range of gender identities more explicitly, just like outreach materials, initial engagement materials, and content and delivery materials can be made more inclusive by placing images that indicate a welcoming, inclusive environment. That can also signal to applicants that it is okay for them to describe who they are if they want to. From the perspective of an applicant, that's a little bit trickier, but programs can do that to invite a wider pool of applicants. Julia, Lexi, anything else?
In addition to optional like gender identification options, you could also have a place to put pronouns for applicants to sort of signal that that's something you're interested in being respectful of, if folks have specific preferences around that. From an applicant perspective, that's obviously tricky and subjective. You know, if you're maybe applying to a job that has these signals, that might feel like a safer thing. If you're not, might, you know, in the other direction. But there also can be sort of indirect ways to signal, like Lourdes was talking about earlier, both like potential lived experience, but also just like experience as like related to advocacy or related to other community-based work. For example, if you're potentially like working as like a peer counselor or in some sort of like community involved space, highlighting that could be another way to signal that that's a lived experience that you have, as well as experience from an advocacy perspective there as well. So, but very subjective too. So I think based on just like a lot of other details.
Yeah, using a cover letter would help there. Maybe an
Yeah.
objective symbol or something, but yeah.
Yeah, gone are the days when you printed up 20 resumes and sent them all out too. So if you were, you know, you could also tailor the resume or the cover letter to whom you were sending it. And like Lexi said, there may be signals that you could sign it, you know, K/they, them, or, you know, there's all kinds of ways to signal, but you may not want to signal to everybody. I mean, that's just the reality of how it is. So, or maybe you do, and if they don't want you, then it's just better to not be there. So it's really subjective. Okay, a question. Did you come across any statistics or studies about how youth, and I'm assuming this is LGBTQ plus youth, feel about marriage? Many people in my conservative state are teaching abstinence until marriage, and I wonder how applicable that is to our young people. And I'm assuming because this is in the context of LGBTQ youth, to LGBTQI youth. Do they, you know, and what's shifted is back in the day, we'd have to say, well, not everybody can get married, and so we'd have to talk about something else. But now everybody can come to the party. So what did you learn about the aspirations of LGBTQI youth and marriage?
I think we all did some reading on this and came at this study with some additional information on this topic as well. One thing that struck me in the conversations that we had with young people that we interviewed and also in the literature was that even though, you know, at the moment everyone has access, a legal access to marriage, that didn't suddenly flip a switch for everyone that like, okay, now I want to get married. And until I was in this study, I don't know that I had thought about that enough. But the people that we spoke with and the literature we read made it clear that that is, you know, something very subjective. I do think there are a lot of young people out there who are skeptical of the institution of marriage. I think the rates of skepticism are higher in the LGBTQ plus community. That's not to say that that's true for everybody, but I do think that was what we were hearing. Lourdes or Lexi?
I wonder if it tracks, you know, just in general, the interest in marriage has declined over the last 20 years. And so, and people getting married for a variety of reasons. And so maybe, like you say, it's more in that community. They're not used to that. They're thinking it's not the same. But in general, you know, it's no longer the norm, shall we say, for young people. At least, you know, it's heavily dependent on your socioeconomics and your level of education as well. So I wonder, did you see any, I guess you weren't studying that, you know, data that shows that if you're college educated, you're more likely to get married? Does that apply to LGBTQI people, or do we know that? Probably don't know that.
We didn't review that data for this study, so I don't want to overstep.
Right.
But
right.
Yeah. I don't know how it tracks, like how it interacts with socioeconomic status, level of education. I'm really not sure.
So Sarah, if that wasn't the question you were asking, please email me. I'll show you my email at the end, and we can have a discussion about marriage and youth and, you know, in general, things we know about the larger population. So is there one, you know, so the people who are sitting here listening are probably planning on applying for a marriage grant in the next cycle, which was in like 11 months. So is there any, and I've heard from ACF headquarters that they're saying, if you choose a population, serve the population. You know, like just don't say you're going to serve the population, but serve the population. So I know you didn't have the top 3 things, but if you were if you were in their shoes and writing a strong proposal, and one of your populations of interest was LGBTQI youth, you know, what's the pro tip for serving them?
The number one tip that I would suggest is what Lourdes ended on. It came up in almost every interview we did with educators and with youth themselves, which was, it's not enough just to be welcoming, to just say that your program is welcoming to everyone, but then, you know, all the examples feature just boys and girls, all the pronouns are he and she. It needs to really be tailored to that population as well. And even talking to educators, you know, if the statistics of, you know, a quarter of high schoolers identify as LGBTQ plus, and, you know, 3/4 identify as cisgender heterosexual, the educators we spoke with didn't feel like they were losing anything by including, you know, really specific examples of LGBTQ plus people and relationships in the program. It's not like the other 3/4 were tuning out. They felt like there was a really big benefit of the cisgender heterosexual students also hearing about the specific issues that LGBTQ young people face in their relationships, and make them, you know, more aware of these issues, more thoughtful, more accepting, and that it was a good thing for the program as a whole. So I would say figuring out ways to tailor the program and going beyond just kind of more high level, we want to keep things, you know, relevant to everybody, really getting in there and figuring out what are the specific relationship issues that LGBTQ plus young people are having and want advice about, and addressing those issues with concrete, you know, examples and information.
Okay, so I have a question for you then. So what would you say the main differences are between, let's say, young love, crush, or whatever, and this isn't about coming out. This is like, this is who I love, you know, whatever flavor you're loving, right? So are there differences between, let's say, puppy love, you know, cisgender relationship versus a LGBTQI relationship? I mean, I kind of like, I'm probably being simplistic, but I think, you know, like relationships have more in common than they don't between people. So just curious if there's, I mean, other than names of what you call your partner, what your pronouns are, you know, are there other things that differentiate a LGBTQI relationship from a cisgender, a heterosexual?
You know, I don't know that it's all different. I'm sure it's not all different. I think there are many commonalities, so it's not to overemphasize the differences either. But we do have, you know, in the paper, we give some more examples about specific relationship issues that we read about or spoke with participants about, that are specific to the LGBT community. So, you know, coming out is a big one. One thing that was very interesting was negotiating that outness in different settings to different people with your partner. You know, if you're a young person in a same-sex relationship, for example, you know, one partner may be more comfortable with, you know, coming out and introducing you as their romantic partner than the other. Might be more comfortable with some people than others, and that just feels like a whole thing to negotiate that is not common among straight cisgender young people. Lourdes or Lexi, anything to add there?
I think that was my takeaway too. Is not so much that, to use example of puppy love, that changes significantly, although I'm not talking out of the research, but more than if an LGBTQ plus youth is experiencing puppy love in the context of not being out equally to all of his friends, friends, parents, and the parents of the other youth. That really shapes that feeling and expression of the relationship in ways that are unique to that youth experience. Having said that, that is also something potentially relatable to a cisgender youth if they have a crush on someone their parents might not want. Like that also can connect. But I think that's where research is needed too, to better understand those differences and how those differences, not necessarily in the way the youth are experiencing a crush, but in the ways that being trans, non-binary, gay or straight in a variety of local contexts can shape how can they express that crush.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, that it's how your identity and who knows it and who's aware of it and who's accepting and who's not, that there'd be like a minefield to go through if you weren't. I mean, it could be the same way ethnically, right? Like you're dating somebody not of our religion, and so, but not to minimize that. Totally, I get it. Okay, I've always wondered about just the, once you have the relationship, is there much that, like if you're, but I take the point, it's all about who you're comfortable being yourself around, and then negotiating that with a partner who might have a different level of comfort. Okay. Well, thank you, three. Thank you, squad, for doing this report today. We will, as I said earlier, we'll be sending you a link so you can download the report yourself. We'll have the webinar up on our site. If Kim has her way, it'll be like tomorrow morning, first thing. But we give ourselves 3 days grace, so give us a little time to do that. The next slide, please. So next month, we have Dr. Scott Crapo from the University of Utah, who did a big study on love notes. And it's not only about the 2 formats, I think he did a long and a short, but also what shifted for young people. And we always love to see what happens, because I'm not kidding when I say, if you have a problem with a young person, relationship skills is probably the answer, right? It addresses sex and sexual activity and violence and graduating out of school and building empathy and on and on. So it'll be fun to learn from Scott what he has learned. So Kim, is there one more slide, or are we done? So if you want to contact me, Sarah, I'm looking at you. kreed@dibblinstitute.org. Love to have that conversation about how you feel about marriage and maybe ways to negotiate what you're doing in your state. And in the meantime, you get 3 extra minutes today to go enjoy yourself, to go do something cool. We'll give you that time, and you don't have to be back on the clock for a few minutes. So again, thank you to the Mathematica group for presenting, and thank you who came today. And may you be well in the coming month. We'll see you in August. Take care.